Hello, everyone. We are Good Guys, and today we have a very interesting topic that is about the importance of not falling for the logical fallacies or cognitive biases that speakers try to use to persuade you to buy their narrative. Now, in my own book, I talk about the 3 essential freedoms according to the ethics of force, or the theory of ethical human action. Freedom from aggression, to be free from acts of aggression against that which is your own, your body or things. Freedom to defend, the freedom to defend what your own or someone else's against aggression. And freedom to act ethically, the freedom to act in any and every way that is not inherently aggressive. And so we should remember that what makes ideas true is not whether they belong to a coherent body of premises and conclusions, but when the definitions, the concepts, reduce the material and communicative meaning of things to functionally the same thing in reality, when the concepts are definitively true. And so you have some tautologies, which are just concepts where the premises and the conclusion are reiterations of the same, because essentially they are saying that logically A equals A. A, as a concept, communicatively or physically, is isomorphic or equivalent, functionally, with the physical reality of things. And this is called a true idea. Rhetoricians, people who use language to persuade, like politicians, lawyers, salesmen, they want you to cooperate with them. They want to gain access to the means of cooperation, collaboration, and coordination by selling you a narrative. But the narrative is not always logical or true. And so, because of that, today we want to speak to you as libertarians in a certain spirit. Everything within freedom, nothing against freedom, nothing outside of freedom. United, we prevail. Divided, we fail. And with no further ado,
today's essay is about fascism, Nazis, dog whistles, demonization, and insults. Fascism is totalitarian. The country is ruled by one party with one leader. Group interest above individual interest, state interest above group interest. The private property of the means of production is not abolished de jure, but it is de facto the state who decides what to do with the means of production, and enterprises are threatened constantly if they don't obey government legislation. Economic life is based on a syndicalist model from the supervision of the state, ruled by the state. There are autarchical tendencies. It is militaristic, expansionist, and imperialist. In a way, because it has, along with the socialist aspect, also a Keynesian aspect, which means a Ponzi scheme in the economic model. To prevent the system from collapsing, there's a need for expansion to externalize the cost. Without such expansion, there will be a kind of economic autophagy, internal parasitism, that will lead to a downfall, and by conquest of new land, there are new hosts for the parasitic state. That is one of the reasons why Italy invaded Ethiopia and invaded Albania. National Socialism had some crucial aspects in common with fascism, but is a distinct ideology. National Socialism was more totalitarian than fascism. The Nazi government forced enterprises to work together in corporations led by the government. The state decided what was to be produced, in what quantity, by what methods, to whom it was to be distributed, what prices would be charged, what wages would be paid, and what dividends and other incomes that the jure owners would receive. In Nazi Germany, the de facto owner of the means of production was the government. Different from fascism, and despite fascism and national socialism are both state nationalists, the nationalism of national socialism is a kind of ethno-nationalism. The nation is the same as the whole of ethnically German people. The Germans are a racial category. The Nazis had a racial doctrine. They replaced the class struggle with race struggle. The highest in the hierarchy, according to the Nazis, was the Nordic race, the Germanic people. Of these Germanic people, the ethnically Germans were meant to rule. The Germanic people were considered the culture-creating people. But even among the Germanic people, some regions and classes were considered more purely Germanic than others. Lower in the hierarchy were the culture-carrying people, other European racial subgroups, like the fellow Europeans, the Romance people, the Celtic people, the Baltic people, and the Greek. But curiously enough, in a later stage, also non-Indo-European people, like the Finnish and Estonians, after changing the definition of what an Aryan was supposed to be in the Civil Service Law of April 1933. And also the Hungarians were included, though disputed. With contemporary genetic tests, we know that Hungarians are not genetically different from the Slavic people of the neighboring countries. In short, both the cultural creating Germanic people and the cultural carrying European people were considered Aryans. I need to emphasize this because in popular use of the term Aryan is identified with the German or the Germanic people. There is a reason for this misunderstanding. The Nordic race was considered as the Aryan par excellence, but administratively, Aryan refers grosso modo to ethnically European people minus Slavic people. For pragmatic reasons, the Japanese were in a later stage considered Aryans of honor. Slavic people were not considered Aryans, but Untermenschen, subhumans, an inferior race. The lowest of the Untermenschen were the Jews. Already in 1920, the NSDAP stated in its program, point 4, that only members of the nation, ipso est the ethnical Germans, may be citizens of the states, and no Jew can be a member of the nation. This in contrast with Mussolini, who granted Jews high functions in his fascist party and who had a Jewish mistress for years. From 1938 on, the fascist government took anti-Jewish measures to please the German ally. But this was an aberration of the fascist ideology and had no biological component. One of the best episodes of the remarkable show The Young Ones is when Neil, the hippie of the group, visits the police station to apply for a job. The policeman at the police station turns out to be literally a fascist. He speaks with an Italian accent, looks like Benito Mussolini, and wears the uniform of the Italian fascist. In this sketch, recorded in 1984, the habit of leftists to call policemen fascist is mocked. More than 40 years after calling someone fascist was already considered something ridiculous to make fun of, fascist as an insult starting among Marxists in the 1920s. Not only fascists were called fascists by the Marxists, but practically all supporters of a third way ideology. National Socialists were called fascists, for example. Moreover, even the Social Democrats were mockingly called social fascists. The Marxists were so vehemently anti-fascist for several reasons. First and foremost, the third way ideologies were in competition with Marxism. They were both seeking popular support, especially among the labor class. Some other reason was the difference between the proposed economical policies. The Marxist-Leninists had a doctrine they called socialism, which was the official doctrine of the Soviet Union until the Union collapsed in the early 1990s, which emphasizes the state control over the means of production, with the private ownership de jure abolished, while the third way ideologies had a state control over the means of production, with de jure still the private ownership of the means of production. Both the Soviet Union and the countries with third way dictatorships had a central planned economy. Socialist USSR had the 5-year plan. National Socialist Germany had the 4-year plan. The USSR had socialism in one country. Germany had National Socialism. The USSR fought class enemies. Germany fought race enemies. Both ideologies were not opposite but derivations of socialism, one international but also rigid state nationalist, and the other nationalist with expansion of the borders. Not antagonistic, but rather evil twin brothers. The horseshoe theory that states that the opposites of the political spectrum resemble each other is partly incorrect. Of course, National Socialism and Marxism-Leninism resemble each other, but not because of their wrongly alleged opposition. They both champion a state-controlled system that uses the individual citizens as instruments or slaves for the status project. For the Marxist-Leninists, the uniform term for all anti-Marxist, anti-capitalist was fascist. Fascist became an expression of great aversion, even worse than the term bourgeois. It was only during the short-lived Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact when the word fascism and its derivatives was hardly mentioned in the state newspaper Pravda. After the start of Operation Barbarossa in 1941, the use of the term came back and the frequency in which it was used was higher than ever. And since in the late 1930s the Italian fascists and the German National Socialists became allies, the use of the term fascist became also acceptable for non-communist opponents of both fascism and National Socialism to describe the third way ideologies as a whole. After World War II, the term fascism could be linked to the disaster of the war and the Holocaust as a term for the worst of the worst, along with the term Nazi, which is an abbreviation of the term National Socialist. the benchmark about how low you can go, the worst what you can be called, along with racist. The Marxist dictatorship of East Germany, called the Berlin Wall, they built in 1961, Antifaschistische Schutzwall, anti-fascist protection wall, saw a wall with more than 300 watchtowers with armed guards that prevented each Germans to go to the west of the city by shooting everyone who attempted to climb over the wall, was considered anti-fascist by the people who built this. So basically, from 1961 on, it should be apparent how strikingly ridiculous the use of the term fascist can be. Fast forward to 1984, with the mentioned The Young Ones sketch, the absurdity has even become a cliche to play with. And now we are living in the mid-2020s, when fascism is irrelevant for 80 years, and when people have over 60 years of experience with absurd and ironic use of the term fascist. The use of the terms like fascist and Nazi have a function. The use is a code word for the inner group, the so-called dog whistle, a means to dehumanize and disqualify a person, a way to say shut up to a person and not to be involved in any discussion with such a person. You don't have discussions with a non-person. By not engaging in any conversation with such low people, you actually have won already, while your own opinions are not challenged. Moreover, you can pose as a good guy, which of course is not true because we are good guys, who unmask a bad guy. That is why it's so appealing to call someone a fascist or a Nazi. A very small investment, just speaking or type a short word with 2 syllables with a very big reward. The other function of calling someone a fascist or a Nazi is to mobilize violence against him. The threshold to become violent against someone who is the lowest of the lowest, a reprehensible human being, is low. If you should hit or kill a man, even because of his opinion, there is a reason for an outcry. There is a victim, a martyr. Freedom of speech is under attack. But if you hit or kill a fascist or a Nazi, there is a horrific person less who completely deserves his fate. And it doesn't matter if someone answers, I'm not a fascist or a Nazi. In that case, you are a crypto-fascist or a crypto-Nazi. You are an occult fascist. You just don't admit it. You could ask yourself, why shouldn't you admit that you are a fascist if you are a fascist? There is a solution. The person who calls you a fascist will play the bad connotations game. Because fascist is the lowest of the lowest, you will not call yourself a fascist, because you don't want to have the reputation to be the lowest of the lowest. And it practically doesn't matter what your opinions are. A notorious quote by Benito Mussolini is, everything in the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. Another one is, fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism, because it is a merger of state and corporate power. These quotes describe quite well the core of fascism. But nevertheless, people who want less state control, who want to end the ties between business and state, are called fascists. While people who want more state and bigger ties between state and corporate power, of course the state with the upper hand, consider themselves anti-fascist. People who want a meritocratic society with equality before the law without regards to race are called Nazis. People who want the class war along racial lines, with different norms for different racial and ethnic groups, beneficial for some races or ethnic groups and disadvantageous for other racial and ethnic groups, consider themselves anti-Nazis and anti-racists. And now I come to a conclusion, practical advice. When confronted with people who call you or others fascist or Nazi, or who call something that isn't fascism or National Socialism fascist, explain in brief why the accused person is not a fascist or a Nazi, or ask for a definition, or tell him or her right away that this is an insult and that someone lacks argument and content, all depending on the context and who expresses such a qualification. In a lot of cases, it will be an insult by someone who doesn't know what he is talking about, who wants to offend a political opponent and who wants to pose as a good person, antagonist to a fascist or a Nazi, said in an unsophisticated way. In that particular case, pointing out that this is an insult and that someone lacks arguments and content is enough. Don't waste your time with trolls. If you are accused yourself to be a fascist or Nazi, and you are already in a well-established conversation, you explain why you are not. If someone is accused to be a Nazi or a fascist in an essay, you can explain this person is not a Nazi or a fascist with a polemic answer if you like. And if you are in a conversation with someone and the person accuses someone else to be a fascist or a Nazi, ask for a definition. In most cases, you will silence the person who uses the word fascist or Nazi right away, or the person will repeat the accusation. In both cases, this confirms that the person doesn't know what he or she is talking about. In some cases, the person will sum up some alleged characteristics of fascism or Nazism. In that case, you can answer with pointing out he is cherry picking, and if you know the source, a Marxist historian, for example, you can give this information in addition. If someone gives a false definition, you can remind him of the characteristics of historical fascism and National Socialism. It is very important to point this out because especially the left is very good in the semantic warfare and the political warfare with terms with very negative connotations. So,
yeah, these are used as ways to, as you mentioned in your essay, call to either cooperation and collaboration with the perceived good guys or even mob violence against someone.
yeah,
If there was a correct or acceptable from the standpoint of ethical human action, from freedom, connotation of the term democracy or power in the hands of the people, like the Second Amendment of the United States, the right to bear arms, or the Citizens' Army of Switzerland, it would be when you see someone beating up an old lady, and then you say, come, let's go protect her and stop him. But when you are initiating force or trying to precipitate violence against someone else, that is a completely different thing.
oh, what if the old lady is called fascist? Then you can alter the group dynamic right away. Then she becomes from a victim to someone who deserves it.
Yeah, and this is very important because they they will try to corner you into, are you for or against? Are you in support of the good guys, which, as you mentioned, in the case of the left would be the cultural Marxists or the Marxists, and everyone else that doesn't cooperate with them is the bad guys. This is the great insight of Javier Milei in Argentina, that power is a zero-sum game. If we don't have it, they have it. And that's why they rush to try to operationally gain more logistic support. They try to, as you mentioned, identify as the good guys so that then they can gain access to the means of cooperation, collaboration, and coordination. And this is the importance of what we discussed in previous episodes, that we can't be Puritan. Actually, we have to think of the essential characteristics of a concept. In the case of freedom, the non-initiation of the use of force, and then everyone who is not against that is potentially a cooperator and ally against those who are for tyranny.
Well, we can be Puritan in theory. We can't be Puritans in practice.
No,
so everyone who is an advocate of more freedom is an ally.
Yes.
Everyone.
As Jesus González Maestro, professor of literature in Spain, says, you must make yourself compatible with reality. Otherwise, reality devours you. And the fact of the matter is that if something is true, it is both common and universal. So things can be abstracted and reduced to a meaningful, common definition, like the initiation of the use of force. And you have to be very careful not to be also presented with the informal families, the informal fallacies, like the family of new fallacies, such as the reductio ad Hitlerum. If Hitler slept on a bed or Hitler had coffee, then you are like Hitler, you are a Nazi. There are superficial similarities that the rhetoricians, the lawyers, the politicians, the salesmen, the people who argue in bad faith, will try to use to identify you as the enemy. Whereas as those who understand libertarian natural law, the ethics of force, know it is about who initiated force. So don't let them fool you or even school you. We are the good guys.
Till next time.